please.
Welcome. Hold up.
Speed 10. Stop. 12 seconds. Speech off.
Welcome back to another video, everybody. Sorry, the other one messed up. So we're gonna finish.
Right. Joe telephoned the schoolman. Late the following morning, Stan Mazer arrived at the Hardy home. He was a middle-aged man of medium height and slender build, and had a troubled expression. "I'm Mazer," he announced. The Hardys led him into the living room, and they all sat down. "You're the pilot of Hexton's helioplane?" Frank asked. "That's right," Mazer answered. "I was hired about 2 months ago." He shifted nervously in his chair. "I needed a job so badly, I snapped it up without question. But I didn't know it was connected with anything illegal." "Weren't you ever suspicious?" Joe asked. "Yes, from time to time, but I wasn't sure. Actually, I closed my mind to the whole situation until you tried to stop my takeoff." "It was a pretty unnerving experience," Frank said dryly. Mazer apologized. "I didn't know you were clinging to the tail until you were thrown clear," he explained. "I wanted to get out and help you, but Vordo forced me to take off." "What about the day we chased you and Timken?"
I like
Joe
to play
said.
drums.
"You turned right into us. We nearly collided." "I didn't know that was you," Mazer said, surprised. "I thought it was some hotshot pilot wanting to play games. I pulled that maneuver, hoping I'd throw a scare into it. Sorry." When Frank asked Mazer where he had taken Vordo and his cohorts, the pilot replied, "To a large airport near New York City. When we landed, Vordo and his companions deplaned and disappeared. I had no idea where." Mazer said that while he was parking the helioplane, he was confronted by a federal agent who told him that all FAA offices had been alerted to be on the lookout for the aircraft. To his surprise, the registration papers turned out to have been obtained under a fictitious name and address. "The agent immediately impounded the plane," Mazer said, "and my pilot's license was revoked pending a hearing." The Hardys asked him if he knew anything about their fathers being kidnapped. "I know nothing about that," he insisted. "Although I did suspect something strange was going on in the lighthouse." "In what way?" Joe asked. "I was never allowed to enter," the pilot answered, "or even to remain long on the islet after delivering my passengers." Frank pretended to be suspicious of the story. "Are you going to tell us you don't belong to the same secret criminal organization Hexton does? He wouldn't let you work for him if you didn't." "What do you mean?" Mazer asked, and his amazement seemed genuine. "I never heard about any criminal organization, and I'm certainly not a member." Joe asked
Speech
him,
on. Screen
"How
curtain
did you
on.
learn
Speech
who
off.
we are and where to contact us?" "Vordo mentioned your names during my last flight," Mazer replied. "He said you're smart detectives." Frank looked at the pilot searchingly. "What made you decide to come here and tell us all this?" Mazer appeared harried. "After what happened at the airport, I knew I'd become involved in something that would get me into deep trouble," he confessed. "I thought if I told you fellows what I know, you'd help me." Frank and Joe sensed that the pilot was being honest, and a slight nod between them said, "He's okay." They promised to do what they could, and advised Mazer to repeat his story to Kenneth Dell. "I'll do it at once," he said. When the pilot left, the boys chuckled at the thought of the agent who had been assigned to follow Mazer. "I'd like to see his face when he tails him to Dell's office," said
12
Joe.
seconds. Stop. 4 minutes.
The Hardys spent the
5
rest
minutes.
of the day
Stop.
packing.
5 minutes. 1 second.
Their flight to the
Speech
Great
off.
Circle base was scheduled for the following morning. Late that afternoon, Chet's bright yellow jalopy screeched to a halt in front of the Hardy home, and the chubby youth leaped out. "I'm packed and champing at the bit," he exclaimed as he greeted his friends. "Good," Frank said. "How about dinner? Aunt Gertrude's trying out a new recipe for beef stew." "Well, okay, but I'll have to make it fast. I want to get home in time for supper." Chet then assumed a nonchalant air. Strolling slowly around the room, he began to whistle softly. The boys watched as he extended his arms in front of him, then clenched his left hand into a fist. From it, with his right hand, he drew out a vivid purple silk scarf, followed by a train of varicolored kerchiefs. "Bravo," Joe said, clapping loudly. "Great trick, eh? I thought you'd like it." When the last scarf refused to come out, however, Chet became aggravated. "What's the matter with this thing?" He tugged on it violently. "Something go wrong?" Joe needled. Suddenly, the kerchief pulled free and dragged the lining of Chet's jacket sleeve along with it. A small black container was revealed. From it popped a metal spring, which shot through the air, then bounced around the floor like a grasshopper. "So that's where all those scarves came from," Frank said. He tried not to laugh. Chet whipped off his jacket and frantically stuffed the lining back into the sleeve. As he chased the bouncing spring around the room, the Hardys burst into howls of laughter. "You fellows are a jinx when it comes to my magic tricks," Chet said indignantly. "Maybe Hexton will give you a few pointers when we get to his castle," Joe teased. By the time Mrs. Hardy and Aunt Gertrude announced dinner, Chet had regained his composure. He had a second helping of dessert, then decided he must leave. "Thanks for the delicious meal," he said. Chet slowly rose from the dinner table. He stuffed the string of silk kerchiefs into his pocket and lumbered out to his jalopy. The next day, Frank and Joe said goodbye to their mother and Aunt Gertrude, then drove off. They picked up Chet and went directly to the Bayport field. Jack Wayne was already warming up the engines when they arrived. Tossing their luggage into the plane's baggage compartment, the boys climbed aboard and strapped themselves into their seats. Minutes later, they were streaking down the runway on takeoff. Kenneth Dell was waiting for them at Great Circle's base. He gave a long briefing. Then, at 6 p.m., led the boys to the plane that was to whisk them overnight to Scotland. Chet and the Hardys took their seats with the other passengers. Soon, the sleek jetliner roared down the runway, lifted off, and headed over the Atlantic. After a while, Chet struck up a conversation with a pretty red-haired stewardess. She managed to keep him amply supplied with food, while he related stories of his long and daring hours in the air. "I don't like to boast," Chet said as he munched on a plateful of cookies, "but I'm going to wake up some morning and find I've sprouted wings if I don't spend more time on the ground." Frank and Joe, meanwhile, studied every passenger aboard, occasionally strolling up and down the aisle on the chance they might recognize some member of Hexton's gang. But nothing seemed to be amiss. Also, no one indicated to the Hardys that he was a schoolman. Suddenly, the loudspeaker crackled to life. "This is your captain speaking," announced a deep voice. "We expect to encounter a cold front in a few minutes. The weather forecast lists it as a weak system, so there should be only light to moderate turbulence. We should be through most of it in 40 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts and relax." The boys looked out the window. Already, the blue sky was beginning to be obscured by wisps of gray clouds. It grew so dark that the cabin lights had to be turned on. The jetliner began to toss jerkily. Chet fell quiet as the stewardess returned to her seat. He stared straight ahead with a blank expression. "What's wrong with you?" Frank called across the aisle. I feel awful," Chet moaned. Seeing the stout boy's expression, the Hardys knew he had overreacted.